Recently I watched the first season of Netflix The Witcher, a show I've been highly anticipating since its announcement. Unfortunately, the show has been an outright disappointment. Therefore, I couldn't help but be taken aback by the amount of praise it's received from fans and games journalists. Now, while I wouldn't call it an outright bad show, I'd be hard pressed to say it's anything more than mediocre. As a fan of the Witcher franchise in general, and hoping for the show to drastically improve in Season 2, I wanted to take the time to address this overblown fanfare by presenting many of its problems. This video will contain spoilers for the entire plot of The Witcher, so if you're interested in watching the show, now would be the time to do so. First, some context. The show follows three protagonists: monster hunter Geralt of Rivia, sorceress Yennefer Vengerberg, and Princess Ciri. All three characters would seem to be interlinked with one another by destiny. Geralt's portion consists of a collection of short stories, Yennefer is her rise to prominence as a mage, and Ciri is her escape from Sintra. The Witcher is set in a dark medieval fantasy full of tropes you'd expect for the genre: body horror, rape, racism, and an ever-fading morality system, to name a few.
The great cleansing, humans call it. I called it digging a mass grave for everyone I loved.
The show takes place during the sudden Nilfgaardian invasion of the Northern Realms. Princess Ciri is forced on the run by the Nilfgaard invasion of Sintra, causing her grandparents to be killed. The Queen, Ciri's grandmother, tasks her with finding Geralt, and as such is the main driving force of the narrative.
Find Geralt of Rivia. He is your destiny.
This is my first problem with the show. It sets up a scenario that's more interesting and more thought-provoking than your average show, but then does nothing with it.
Today isn't your day, is it?
For example, Geralt is a Witcher, thus he is ostracized by both North and South, making him neutral in the war.
Hear that? Go. On your own, or at the end of a rope, your choice.
Yennefer is a quarter-elf mage, but also knows the cost to their way of life as a sorceress and a peasant. Consequently, she might be more sympathetic to foreign rule.
I don't care what you do, but remember this. Even if you do everything right, follow their rules, that's still no guarantee you'll get what you want.
As mentioned, Ciri's grandmother was killed by Nilfgaard, forcing her on the run. Hence, it's probably safe to assume that Ciri hates Nilfgaard. Telling the conflict from three different perspectives, all with different viewpoints on the war and the events, is an interesting concept. Sadly, the show never truly attempts to make use of it. By the time the conflict is brought to the forefront in Yennefer and Geralt's story, the show's over. Yennefer has banded with the mages in the north at Sodden, and Geralt has met up with Ciri, all by the time the show wraps up. In fairness, there is something to be said about the world of The Witcher. The Witcher sets up a world where the humans tend to be more monstrous than the beasts themselves. Not exactly Shakespeare, but fascinating all the same. But once again, this is squandered for a focus in the second half on the relationships between Ciri, Geralt and Yennefer. Which, in theory, is a respectable idea. Keep the focus on the characters and their relationships with one another. But since Geralt and Ciri don't meet until the last scene, and Yennefer and Ciri don't meet at all, it's strange to have all the show's focus there, considering how actual little screen time they share with each other. Even when the other elements like the racist and xenophobia subplots are given the focus, it's often shoved in the viewer's face without any sort of nuance. Geralt's short stories suffer most from this lack of nuance. Once the episode's mystery has been relayed to the viewer, you're presented with the reveal of the twist almost immediately. This is because Geralt's plots consist of him being presented a mystery, cutting away to another character, and then cutting back when he's solved it. Consequently, There's nothing for the viewer to figure out. There's no nuance. There's no depth. The show's just constantly shifting focus back to the characters as quickly as possible, completely defeating the purpose of a mystery subplot. To be fair, the show starts stronger than it finishes. The first 3 episodes are the most solid in my opinion, mostly because they're more focused and coherent than the later ones. Although, that doesn't mean I'd call the first 3 episodes good. It always feels like one protagonist is always suffering from the episode's time constraints. This can be seen when Geralt meets Filavandrel in episode 2, as a key plot point in that story is resolved off screen. The show had a very clear goal in mind from the outset, and that was to have the mother, father and daughter bond with Yennefer, Geralt and Ciri respectfully. If I had to guess, I'd say this was the writing team's top priority. The show attempts to achieve this in just a short space of time by having all 3 stories run consecutively at once. Yennefer and Geralt's plots are incredibly problematic as they span years in just a few episodes. This has had a detrimental effect to the narratives being told in just the context of an episode. Geralt's stories just start to get interesting before they are cut short and wrapped up. Yennefer's tale after she becomes Eredin's advisor are too rapid, lack context and are hard to follow, probably to do with all the time jumping it's doing. Ciri's parts on the other hand are so brief that she's only allowed to meander around from place to place, trading one war-torn area for another. Unfortunately, not only are Ciri's parts short, but they're obvious as well. Firstly, Ciri is linked with Geralt by destiny, thus she can never stay with any group or place for too long, as that would defeat the purpose of her destined search for Geralt, making the majority of her encounters pointless, as you always know she can't linger for too long. Secondly, this gets taken even further when you consider her powers. The viewer now never has any concern of her getting hurt either, ruining all tension. Therefore, Ciri gets betrayed 3 times before meeting Geralt at the end, because it's clear it was the only way to create drama for our character. Ciri's portion of the plot is just one big time waster until they told Geralt and Yennefer's backstory. Maybe you think I'm being overly harsh with that, and in some ways I am, but it just goes to show you how much consideration they actually put into Ciri's plot, despite her being the main driving force of the narrative. One good thing to come out of her story was Dara, her elf friend, although only because he's used as an exposition tool to relay the torture the elves have received from the north. However, it's not nearly given enough screen time.
What you really mean is that you're just like Calanthe. You bring terror and you bring death wherever you are!
The show's willingness to rush past key plot points has negatively affected the character development as well. Naturally, Yennefer was a character that was meant to be a broken, mistreated girl who would stop at nothing to be accepted. She goes through a horrible transformation, causing her to become barren. All this just so she can be beautiful. Ultimately, she realises that her need for acceptance cost her the only reason to live in the first place, her ability to create a future and a legacy for herself. Maybe you could argue I'm overthinking it, but that seems like the character arc the show was going for. Sadly, this all happened so fast that Yennefer goes through a full personality change within the space of a minute.
Yennefer of Vengerberg.
She then realises she's made a mistake with her transformation somewhere off screen and within the space of an episode. Before you know it, Yennefer devolves into a character that mopes around a lot, catching herself in countless double standards before realising she wants to fight for the North. This decision is not helped by the fact that they make her complain about it constantly.
If I did, I'd vote to burn it all down.
To be fair, this is mitigated slightly by the actress's strong performance. But overall, Yennefer is characterised poorly. Problems escalate further when we look at the show's structure, which can be outright nonsensical at times. Geralt's portions often have a beginning and end per episode, while Ciri's and Yennefer's plots tend to blend into the next episode. Which is fine, it means the viewer is always being left with a cliffhanger and a resolution each time an episode wraps up. Time is moving linearly at this point in the show, as you would expect. Eventually, it's revealed that Geralt's and Yennefer's portions are happening in the past. In fairness, some of this was expected, as it was clear that Geralt's and Yennefer's stories were progressing much faster time-wise, therefore couldn't be transpiring at the same time as series. But not to the extent of what is portrayed in the show. Decades have passed at best for Geralt and Yennefer by the time they get to the season finale, which is when the show finally catches up to series timeline. The show doesn't benefit by playing with the viewer's expectations like this, because it breaks the illusion that the stories are connected in any meaningful way. In fact, it has the unintended consequences of completely undermining Geralt and Ciri's story. As the show now implies that for decades Geralt wanted nothing to do with Ciri, and that Ciri's search for Geralt up to this point has been worthless. Ciri has literally just been wandering around in circles. Keep in mind, Geralt found Ciri without even searching for her, despite Ciri searching for him for 8 episodes. This somewhat undermines the fact that they're all destiny bound together. The time jumps ain't even achieved coherently, or with any sort of interesting nuance either. It's not like Geralt and Jaskier are made to look any older. Jaskier hasn't any longer hair, nor does Geralt have some new scars, cluing the audience in to the fact that some time has passed since their last encounter. Instead, it's achieved in the cheapest way possible, by using vague throwaway lines.
Geralt! Hello. What's it been, months? Years? What is time, anyway? I heard you were in town. Are you following me, you scamp?
Even when it would be favourable to do a time jump, the show botches that as well. Yennefer has received a lot of praise for her characterisation, but on a fundamental level, she doesn't react the way she should. She spent her entire life locked away, mistreated and used, even when she became a mage. Yet, when she goes through a transformation, her entire personality shifts from antisocial to having better social skills than Tessera herself. It's not like she couldn't have adopted this personality over time, but in the time frame of the show, it happens within 10 minutes. This is one moment where a time jump would have been favourable. The most annoying thing is how easy this would have been to solve. The show could have opened with Geralt getting bit looking for Ciri, being put on the merchant's cart en route to the man's farm, just like in the last episode. While he's dying on the cart, we frame all the episodes as Geralt having flashbacks of all his past adventures. Not only would this explain all the time jumps, as Geralt flashing back from different memories as he's hallucinating, this would fix Jaskier and others not aging, as you could chalk it up to Geralt misremembering the event. It would also fix Geralt and Yennefer's relationship, as the viewer would just be seeing the random encounters they had with each other over the years. Therefore, the true extent of their past together is kept hidden. Having simultaneous storylines isn't inherently the problem either. Lost is another popular show that did it as well. But Lost had much more focus and took the time to develop both storylines. They often had a connecting theme or message joining the two stories together. The Witcher makes no such effort, even when it would seem obvious to do so. For example, Episode 1 for Geralt is about the lesser evil, and does a decent job at showing how the best way to win cannot be to play at all, signifying to the viewer that Witchers are better off staying neutral, a motif captured well in both the games and the books. It would have been very easy to have Ciri go through a similar lesson in this episode, with her grandmother trying to fight back against Nilfgaard, thus tying the narratives together. But that kind of thought would be asking too much from a show that can't even decide who to make the main character. Instead, The Witcher tells 3 different stories that only interlink, put Yennefer and Geralt together, or to show us Ciri's connection to Geralt. Lost, on the other hand, focused in on one character per episode, with 2 stories running side by side each episode. One story would illustrate what the character was like off the island, another would show how the island had changed them. This gave the viewer tangible evidence of character growth and development. Now, Lost was hardly a masterpiece itself, but how anyone could look at the way The Witcher tells its story and see it as an improvement is baffling to me, considering how poorly thought out The Witcher's plot actually is. None of this surprises me though. The philosophy of The Witcher is to get Ciri and Geralt together. If something gets in the way of that, cut it or simplify it. The book's plotline that the show seems so eager to rush past just seems like a burden on the narrative, rather than the jumping off point it should have been used for. I believe the show was taken more from the games than it would probably care to admit. Geralt's voice would be the obvious one.
If I have to choose between one evil and another, then I prefer not to choose at all.
If I'm to choose between one evil and another, I'd rather not choose at all.
But it's the relationship between the three characters in that game I think the show has taken from the most. The father-daughter relationship between Geralt and Ciri was one of the main driving forces for the player in that game. This, with the fact that Geralt and Yennefer had been estranged for so long, added to the drama between the three characters. This all took place while Ciri was being chased by the Wild Hunt and in the backdrop of the Nilfgaardian invasion in full effect. This all led to great emotional scenes between the characters and put Geralt in the heroic father role. Are you starting to see the similarities here? The show aims for all these lofty ambitions. Unfortunately, the show's not willing to take the time or the effort to accomplish it. The show's Geralt is portrayed to be a father figure, despite him not having any relation or having met Ciri. Yennefer is made out to be very motherly, despite being incredibly selfish most of the time, something Geralt even acknowledges at one point.
You flit about like a tornado, wreaking havoc. And for what? So you can have a baby? A child is no way to boost your fragile ego, Yen.
These character inconsistencies from what they say to how they actually are is explained away once again by destiny. Even when the show comes close to interesting conflict between characters, it just throws thinly vague acknowledgements before moving on to the next plot point. Sadly, the relationship between characters isn't much better. Take Geralt and Jaskier for example. Although I think Jaskier and Geralt are excellently cast and portrayed by their actors, I can't say the same about their friendship. Jaskier is used for comic relief, constantly pestering Geralt. Although this is a great way to start their friendship, unfortunately their relationship never evolves past this. Even despite the episode where Geralt saves Jaskier from a djinn, the two never seem to share any commonality with each other. It felt like Geralt saved Jaskier just because he's the hero of the show. Further from that, just as a way to put Geralt and Yennefer in a room together. It never came off as the friendship bonding moment it was meant to be, since the episode was shifting towards Yennefer and Geralt's relationship. Which is another example about how the show is too caught up with setting up the family dynamic, rather than the focus of the episode. The show can't seem to get its priorities straight and the focus is all over the shop. When Geralt ends his so-called friendship with Jaskier, it doesn't carry any real weight, because there wasn't much depth to their friendship to begin with.
Imagine you'll probably...
Damn it, Jaskier! Why is it whenever I find myself in a pile of shit these days, it's you shoveling it?
That's not fair.
The child surprise, the djinn, all of it. If life could give me one blessing, it would be to take you off my hands.
It's funny, the only time they ever seem to talk to each other on an emotional level, it's to end their friendship. This scene is reflective of the show as a whole, giving us hints at some development between characters and their relationship, but never following through on it. As I've said, Jaskier and Geralt's friendship could never really get off the ground, because the show was too busy using that time to set up Yennefer's relationship with Geralt. But this doesn't fare much better either. In the space of a half an hour, Geralt goes from meeting Yennefer, to risking his life for her, to wishing his life was destined to her, to sleeping with her, and finally abandoning Yennefer while she sleeps. I've heard of relationships moving fast, but this is downright idiotic. Geralt and Yennefer then reconcile in the next episode for some reason, just to break up again by the end of the episode for some reason. Keep in mind, according to the show, Geralt and Yennefer have only encountered each other twice by this point, yet it is portrayed like they've been together for years. The show was too concerned with rushing past all these details just to form a history between the two characters that the relationship comes off feeling shallow. If you thought the relationships were bad, that's not in comparison to the side characters. I'd love to talk about some of the side characters, but that's the problem, there's nothing to say about them. Regrettably, none of them don't get nearly enough screen time. It's nice to see characters like Triss, but she and characters like her are practically extras in the show, offering very little apart from a spoken line or two. In fairness, we can talk about Tissaia, Yennefer's magic teacher and mentor in Aretuza. I think, although only to a minor degree, Tissaia displays what's possible for a nuanced character to achieve in the show. You'd be forgiven for initially thinking she was going to be the true villain of the narrative. Instead, the character draws a fine line between cruelty and what you could consider tough love. There's something very motherly about her, and although she can be cruel, she's never portrayed to be violent.
It is your job to control chaos, not become it.
I can.
But if I send you to advise a king, and your precious little feelings get hurt when he won't listen, and you submit to chaos, he dies, his people turn on us. Whose fault would that be?
Mine.
No. Mine. For letting you ascend.
While her plan in the final battle is outright stupid, I do like the fact that she tried to talk down Fringilla. This plays into her character, that she cares about her mages like a mother. There's definitely more positives about her than negatives, and I can't say that about most characters in the show. Speaking of the final battle, in the end, Nilfgaard attacks Sodden in hopes of cutting off Ciri. A rebel band of mages make one last stand as they wait for the Nord armies to arrive. The attack begins with both sides utilising magic, and they take heavy casualties on each other, while Yennefer watches for some reason. Tissaia tries to talk down Fringilla, the Nilfgaardian mage and her former student. Fringilla had no qualms to this point about using mages' lives to win, making the conversation between the two practically pointless. Then as more innocents continue to die, Yennefer is still just watching. As Tissaia wakes from Fringilla disabling her, she finally tells Yennefer to do something, but only when Yennefer is attacked, falls from a tower, and comes to find her. If there ever was a plan or strategy here, I just can't seem to make sense of it, and it seems like either could the writers, as, out of nowhere, Yennefer channels a massive stream of fire, defeating the Nilfgaardians in one go. Why Yennefer couldn't just do that from the get-go and save countless innocent lives defies logic. Furthermore, the man who throws his sword countless times, disarming and weakening himself, then just to be kicked down a hill, is downright ludicrous. Triss looks comical holding the barrier of vines, and it's hard to say how much it helped against the attack. But beyond all that, the situation is completely contrived, pointless, and lacks any emotional impact. Imagine for a second how much writers get paid, and how hard it would be to get a writing job for a big budget show like The Witcher. Think of all the skills, degrees, and years in the industry you'd probably need. Now let's look at what the show considers good writing. The stakes for the entire last battle at Sodden, the total climax of the show, is represented by this one farmer's line.
Shit luck. Take Sodden, you take the North, some say.
He's not even linked to the battle, or any of the characters in any meaningful way, yet he's the one they give such an important line to. The show is full of mythical creatures, much less likely to be known by the casual viewer, and the show never goes into too much detail about them. Yet, when the Witcher says he's looking for a djinn, Jaskier immediately says genie and talks about making wishes. As if an audience member couldn't figure that out without Jaskier saying it, given the context of the episode.
A djinn.
A what?
I'm looking for a djinn.
For a djinn? Like a genie? The floaty fellas with the bad tempers and the banned magics, that kind of genie?
Yes, it'll grant me wishes. It's in this lake somewhere, and I can't fucking sleep!
For a show hell-bent on creating a convoluted narrative, it's crazy to see how much hand-holding the show actually does. Geralt says he's looking for a genie, just to find one seconds later. The man who mentions to Geralt about the gold dragon turns out to be a gold dragon himself moments later. This isn't good writing, it's just outright lazy storytelling. The only interesting things the show does comes from the books, and I'd be worried for the writing team if the material from the books ever ran out. I'm struggling to understand what The Witcher wanted to achieve. If it wanted to tell the father-daughter bonding story, it fails in that regard as well. Ciri and Geralt are not related in any way, so the only thing connecting the two characters as father and daughter is the law of surprise, an absolutely stupid custom. I could go into why that custom is outright nonsensical, but this video would never be over, so forgive me if I brush over a few things. Even if we disregard all that, it's tough to imagine that Ciri cares about Geralt, since she's never met him in person. But why would she? Geralt abandoned her the second he was made aware of her existence. Their relationship to one another is revealed as a twist, despite the fact that Queen Calanthe had plenty of time to tell Ciri on her deathbed. Geralt only really cares about her when Nilfgaard invades. The show even states that Geralt didn't even know about Ciri's parents' death, showing how out of touch he is in Ciri's life. I know the Queen didn't make it easy for Geralt, but Geralt at this point has shown countless times he doesn't mind disregarding authority. Therefore, it's hard to respect a man who only shows up in Ciri's life in the last 5 minutes. It's also senseless for why Geralt doesn't call out for her at the end. He actually turns away at the end, like he's given up searching, despite the fact he barely looked for her. This only adds to his bad father characterization. All these flaws and inconsistencies are hand-waved away by claiming it's destiny.
People linked by destiny will always find each other.
I don't know about you, but I don't like my intelligence being insulted like that. Destiny is used as an all-in-one term to explain away contrived scenarios and events. I actually don't mind contrived scenarios if it leads to an interesting outcome. Sadly, The Witcher story does not. The Witcher thinks it's clever by telling its plot out of order, but instead it becomes incoherent. Most importantly, I don't think any of these problems that I've addressed come from its lack in budget and talent. No, it comes from the fact that The Witcher is too wrapped up in telling its future overarching story, rather than expressing its present one coherently. So, because of the sloppy writing, the characters and plot have been left wanting. So then the question becomes, why do I think The Witcher is getting some rave reviews from fans? Something tells me a large marketing budget mixed with a generic middle ground of settings and characters, all based on a popular franchise, is to blame. Or to be put more simply, fans are just happy to see their beloved characters on screen no matter what the shape or form, even when it's done poorly. In fairness, if I was being truly honest, The Witcher is adequate in every aspect except for one. The directing is decent, the casting and acting are good, the effects strike a nice balance between practical and computer generated, the show can strike a nice atmosphere and tone, and the action is solid. It's the writing that truly lets it down. And when something as fundamental as the writing is weak, it tends to bring the rest of the aspects of the show down with it. I'll admit, some of the positive details are omitted from this review, such as Henry Cavill's performance as Geralt. The point was never to make a fair and balanced review. I just wanted to express the fanfare around this show to be utter nonsense, with fans just caught up in the hype. I don't want the showrunners or Netflix thinking this is good storytelling, because it's not. As then, this type of work will continue to be produced. Although The Witcher is a step in the right direction for Netflix and other networks to delve into adapting more diverse media, such as video games. And yes, I know it was a book first, but the video games made it famous, so I think that's a fair statement. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that Netflix The Witcher as a piece of media that can stand on its own, I believe it's an outright failure. Depending on your point of view, Netflix The Witcher is either a blessing or a curse on its franchise. From one point of view, it's a new take on an established series. From another, it's a safe product in a generic middle ground, conforming to what sells. The books inspired the game, and the game inspired the show, but I don't think this show will be inspiring anything, and that's the real shame. The silver lining here is there's so much that hasn't been explained in the show yet. Motivations haven't been made clear, and the world's rules haven't been set in stone. So basically what I'm saying is, there's nothing that can't be fixed with better writing in Season 2. But in order to do that, we need to recognise the problems present in the show, and express our disappointment. So if we want The Witcher to improve in Season 2, we need to look at it in a fair and objective way in order to make that happen. This has been Jamie's review of The Witcher, and if you got this far in the video, I want to thank you for watching.